I never thought the day my little girl got married would be the day I felt the smallest in my own family. The church bells were still ringing in my ears as we walked into the reception hall. White tablecloths, glittering centerpieces, champagne flutes catching the light like tiny stars. I had been looking forward to this moment for months. I pictured myself giving a heartfelt toast, maybe even making her laugh the way I used to when she was a little girl in pigtails. But then, it happened. My son-in-law in his polished tuxedo and stiff smile walked up to me, glanced around like he didn't want anyone to hear and said, "Michael, the family tables are full. Why don't you take a seat at the back?" At first I thought it was a joke. But when I looked into his eyes, I saw it, the cold, dismissive kind of look that slices deeper than any knife. My own daughter avoided my gaze. That moment changed everything. By the end of the night, I wouldn't be sitting at the back table. I'd be standing on stage and the whole room would be looking at me. Please subscribe to this channel. I stood there with his words still buzzing in my ears like a mosquito you can't swat. "Michael, the family tables are full. Why don't you take a seat at the back?" For a second the room tilted. The reception hall at the Willow Creek Event Center smelled like roses and buttercream, and a string quartet was folding itself into some soft Ed Sheeran cover near the stage. Laughter popped like champagne corks. Every table near the dance floor was ringed with smiling faces, expensive suits, and the kind of confidence that comes with knowing there's a place set for you. Apparently not for me. I swallowed hard and nodded as if he'd asked me the time. My daughter, my Sarah, stood a few steps behind him, her bouquet tucked under an arm, her smile brittle as spun sugar. She didn't look at me, not directly. When our eyes almost met, she turned to pose for a cousin's iPhone. The photographer kept calling for family, and I felt my face heat like I was sitting under a heat lamp. I told myself to breathe. I told myself to act like a father, not a wounded boy. I pasted on a smile and drifted through the hum of people who knew me, neighbors, old church friends, men from the shop who'd watched Sarah grow up and had chipped in for a group gift card to Crate and Barrel. They thumped me on the back, asked me if I was ready for the father-daughter dance, joked about not crying too hard when I gave my toast. "Yeah," I said, voice light. "Wouldn't miss it." I lied because my pride needed me to. And because part of me truly believed this had to be a misunderstanding. The son-in-law, Ethan, was young and stiff and came from a family that uses napkin rings and calls dessert pudding. Maybe he'd panicked. Maybe he'd miscounted chairs. Maybe this was a planning snafu, nothing more. Still, the words kept scraping. "Why don't you take a seat at the back?" I walked toward the seating chart, a big gold-framed mirror with names scrawled in white paint marker. I scanned the lists, tracing the columns with my finger. There it was, Table 27, Michael Grant. I followed the room numbers in my head and realized Table 27 wasn't just toward the back. It was 3 steps from the exit and practically in the coat room's shadow. I could smell mothballs and a hint of cleaning solution. If I leaned back, I'd be able to open the door for guests leaving early. A server in a black vest hurried by. "Sir, can I help you find your table?" "I found it," I said, my jaw tight. "I found it just fine." I set the small gift I'd brought, a slim velvet box with something I'd saved all year to buy, on the chair. Then I sat. The linens were crisp. The centerpiece was smaller than the ones up front, a squat jar of baby's breath instead of the white peonies exploding like fireworks on the family tables. A place card with my name lay perfectly centered above a salad that had already started to wilt. A hand touched my shoulder. "Dad." My sister, Laura, slid into the seat beside me without waiting for an answer. She always did that, filled space with her presence like warm sunlight. She wore a navy dress and the same quick eyes my mother had. "Why are you back here?" she whispered, glancing toward the front. "Is this a joke?" "Seems like the punchline," I said. She exhaled slowly, then straightened. "I'm going to fix this." "Don't," I said, sharper than I meant to. She flinched and I softened. "Please. Not now. This is Sarah's day." "It's our family's day too," she murmured. "And you're her father." Before I could respond, the DJ's voice boomed from the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our wedding party." Ethan's groomsmen jogged in like a college team. The bridesmaids' silky champagne-colored dresses flowed after them, clapping and laughing. My daughter appeared last, hand in Ethan's, her dress catching the lights and throwing them back like water. The guests stood, the room bursting into applause. I stood too, of course. My eyes stung. I told myself it was pride and not the sour ache growing under my ribs. When the applause died down, the DJ announced, "Family tables, please remain seated for dinner service. Everyone else, hang tight, we'll come to you." The servers streamed toward the front with trays held like offering plates. Up near the stage, wine flowed, bread baskets emptied, and someone popped a bottle too excitedly, sending foam over a tablecloth. It looked like a commercial happiness arranged for the camera. Table 27 waited. Laura rubbed my shoulder again. "I'll be right back." "Laura, don't." But she was already weaving through chairs, chin set. I watched her approach the head table where Sarah and Ethan sat, glowing. Laura leaned down to speak to my daughter. I saw Sarah's smile go tight, saw Ethan's mouth flatten into a line. Sarah shook her head. Laura didn't back away. She said something else, and Sarah looked past her, scanning the room until her eyes landed on me. We stared at each other, 2 points at the ends of a taut wire. Finally, she waved Laura off with a tiny motion and turned back to Ethan. Laura returned to me with the look people wear when they've been told a store doesn't honor returns. "Well?" I asked, keeping my voice even. "She said the seating is set," Laura replied. "That they had to make some tough choices because of space. She said you'll get your turn for the father-daughter dance and the toast." She said, Laura glanced at me, guilt in her eyes. She said, "Please tell Dad not to make a scene." I nodded once. Something inside me clicked into place, not anger exactly, but a quiet confirmation. A line had been drawn, and they expected me to stand on my side of it and smile. Dinner reached us eventually, lukewarm. I cut my chicken and listened to the laughter up front, the clink of forks, the saxophonist winding through at last. When I looked down the aisle of tables, I saw my daughter's head thrown back at something Ethan's father said. The man wore the easy authority of someone who owns something important. Banker? Attorney? Whatever he was, he had his sleeves rolled and his tie loosened just enough to signal comfort without losing control. A memory rose uninvited. Sarah at 9, knees dirty, hair in pigtails, racing down the driveway yelling, "Daddy, look at me." She'd leap and twirl and I'd clap like I was watching a miracle because I was. I had taught her to ride a bike, to check the oil in her first hand-me-down car, to keep her chin up in front of people who mistook kindness for weakness. I had been there for every school play, every dentist appointment, every broken heart, somebody's reliable shadow. At table 27, I was a smudge at the edge of the photo. The toast started. Ethan's best man told a story about college hijinks, careful to keep it clean but still edgy enough to make the bridesmaids squeal. Ethan's father stood, tapped his glass, and launched into a polished speech about family, legacy, and welcoming new members into a tradition that goes back generations. His eyes flicked to me for half a second and slid away like I was a lamp. The DJ cleared his throat. And now, a few words from the father of the bride. My chest thudded. I wiped my mouth with the napkin, stood, and felt Laura squeeze my hand under the table like a field medic. I began to walk forward, but halfway there Ethan was suddenly beside me, his palm a light pressure at my elbow. He leaned in, breath minty, voice too calm. "Michael, we're actually running a little behind," he said. "Could you keep it under 3 minutes?" 3 minutes, I repeated. "For 27 years. His smile didn't move. "You understand." I nodded because that seemed to be my new role, the understanding man. I reached the stage and took the microphone. The light was harsh compared to the soft room. The crowd quieted. I looked out at faces I knew and faces I didn't. I looked at my daughter. Her lips pressed together, a message I couldn't quite read. I felt the words I'd written in the weeks before, funny stories, gentle advice scatter like leaves. I could hear the clock in Ethan's 3-minute limit tick. "Good evening," I said. My voice was steady. "I'm Michael. I'm Sarah's dad." A murmur rose. "Hi, Michael." Glasses lifted. I took a breath. I had a whole speech planned, I began, about the time Sarah painted the garage door purple and swore the cat did it, and about the dent in the Corolla she refused to admit was from sneaking to Seeley's Lake at midnight. Laughter bubbled up. Even Sarah smiled, despite herself. But standing here I keep thinking about something else. I keep thinking about doors. I let that hang, then continued. The day Sarah was born, a door opened in me I didn't know existed. And everything good in my life walked through it. Love, patience, fear I never knew I could hold, pride I didn't think I was allowed. Today she walks through a new door. And I hope truly that on the other side she finds kindness, respect, and room for everyone who loves her. My throat tightened. Because that's what family is. Not the table you're assigned. The table you make space at. A hush settled. I felt something electric move through the room. It wasn't a perfect speech. It wasn't the one I'd practiced in the mirror. But it was true. I finished with, "To Sarah and Ethan, may your home always have another chair to pull up." I lifted my glass. Cheers. People clapped. Some stood. Laura wiped her eyes openly. I handed the microphone back to the DJ and stepped down. Ethan was there, smiling like a photograph. 2 minutes, 46 seconds, he said lightly. Perfect. I walked past him without answering. Back at table 27, dessert appeared. A slice of vanilla cake with a smear of raspberry. I wasn't hungry. I was thinking about the velvet box under my chair. Inside was a small old thing. My mother's locket, cleaned and polished with space for 2 tiny photos. One of Sarah at 3 in a floral dress, one of her now, printed and cut with the careful clumsiness of a man who still uses kitchen scissors for everything. I'd planned to give it to her during our dance, to whisper that love changes shape but not weight. When the DJ announced, "Father-daughter dance," the room hooped. Sarah stood, smoothing her dress. The opening notes of "What a Wonderful World" poured out, syrupy and sweet. I rose. My legs felt heavy, but the kind of heavy that also feels like purpose. Halfway to the dance floor, Ethan stepped into my path again. He did it so naturally you'd think we were choreographed. His smile was smaller now. "Michael," he said softly, "before you two dance, Sarah and I agreed it would be best if it's brief. Just the first chorus." "The first chorus," I repeated, feeling like a tape recorder of his boundaries. "Her train," he explained as if that made sense. And the photo schedule. Sarah stood at the edge of the floor waiting. The lights dimmed. Guests lifted phones. I looked at Ethan's hand resting on my forearm, then back at my daughter. I said, "Of course," and moved past him. When Sarah's fingers touched mine, the world righted itself for a moment. She was shaking. She looked up at me glossy-eyed and whispered, "Dad, please don't make this harder." "Am I?" I asked. She blinked. "Just, please. Let's get through tonight." Get through tonight. As if I were a storm. As if I were weather to endure. We swayed. I could smell her perfume, jasmine, and something new I didn't recognize. I felt the murmurs around us, the gaze of 100 lenses. I wanted to say 100 things. Instead I said, "You look beautiful." "Thank you," she whispered, staring over my shoulder. At the first chorus she began to pull away. I held her hand a second longer than allowed. She slipped free like a fish, smiled for the cameras, and returned to her husband. I stood in the soft light of the dance floor alone for half a breath, then walked back to table 27. People avoided eye contact in that polite American way, guilt disguised as privacy. I sat, picked up the velvet box, ran my thumb over its hinge. I thought of my mother closing her hands over mine when Sarah was born, saying, "Your job is simple and hard, Michael. Show up and make room." I looked toward the stage where the DJ shuffled pages and the coordinator whispered in his ear. Behind them, a projection screen waited slides of the bride and groom, the program said. There would be a video montage, the kind I'd offered to make. Ethan had said his friend had it covered. I'd stepped back, wanting to be easy, to be supportive. The servers began clearing plates. The quartet packed up and a playlist took over, louder and shinier. On the far side of the room, the venue manager spoke with two men in suits I didn't recognize. They pointed at the stage, then at the ceiling rigging. The manager nodded, hurried toward a side door. Laura leaned in again. "You okay?" she asked. "I'm learning," I said. "Learning what?" "How to take notes," I replied, and surprised myself with a small smile. "Notes?" I slipped the velvet box into my jacket pocket, patted it twice, and stood. "From tonight," I said, my voice low. "On what matters? On who matters? On how rooms are arranged." Laura's eyes searched mine. "Michael." "Relax," I told her, resting a hand on her shoulder. "I'm not going to make a scene." She exhaled. "Okay." I didn't tell her that some scenes don't look like scenes until the lights shift and you realize where the camera's been pointed all along. The DJ's voice boomed again. "All right, folks. Before we open the dance floor, we've got a special presentation courtesy of the groom's best friend and media wizard, Kyle." Applause. The screen flickered to life. A slideshow of Sarah and Ethan, latte art dates, beach sunsets, that staged proposal with fairy lights. The room oohed and awed. I watched quietly, each image a small, curated truth. When a picture of Sarah at 10 flashed up missing a front tooth, holding a frog, I startled. That was from my old photo box, the one under my bed. I'd scanned it last month, sent it to Sarah, asked if she wanted any old shots for her wedding video. She'd never responded. But here it was, framed in gold, captioned, "She was always meant to be yours." Funny, I thought. She'd been mine first. As the video ended, the crowd burst into applause. The DJ thanked Kyle, the lights brightened, and the dance floor filled. Ethan spun Sarah. She laughed, loose and bright, and for a moment I saw my little girl again, unburdened by seating charts and perfect timelines. I sat back and felt the velvet box press into my ribs. The night wasn't done. A door had opened in me again, not the one from the day she was born, but its cousin, tougher around the hinges. I wasn't angry in the way that burns fast and dies. I was clear. There's a difference. Table 27 gave me a view of almost everything. The stage, the management desk, the soundboard, the clusters of guests. It also gave me time. Time to think about language, about family tables are full, and keep it under 3 minutes, and please don't make a scene. Time to remember who paid the deposit on this venue when the first check bounced and who quietly ordered extra chairs, just in case. Time to recall what the contract said about microphones and access. I folded my napkin, stood and smoothed my jacket. The room swirled with music and laughter. No one noticed me slip along the edge, moving toward a door marked staff only that I'd seen the manager use earlier. No one saw me lift the latch with the ease of a man who's worked with his hands his whole life. No one heard the quiet promise I made to myself as I slipped inside. If there's no room at their table, I'll make a stage of my own. The staff hallway smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and warm bread from the kitchen. Voices echoed down the corridor, clinking trays, cooks shouting for more sauce, a dishwasher's rhythmic clatter. I wasn't in anyone's way, so no one stopped me. That's the thing about confidence. Walk like you belong and most people assume you do. I passed a stack of folded linens, the venue manager's office door ajar. Inside, I saw a clipboard on the desk with the night's run sheet, written in block letters. My eyes flicked over it. I noticed the slot for final toast at 10:15 p.m., best man and groom only. My name wasn't anywhere after the father-daughter dance. Not surprising, I thought. But still a nail in the board. I kept moving until I reached the small sound booth tucked behind the stage's black drapes. The DJ was still at his setup out front, head bobbing to the beat, so this little room was empty except for the glow of a backup monitor showing the crowd. From here, I could see the whole room without being seen. Ethan and Sarah were laughing with his parents at the head table. My sister was talking with one of our cousins, her arms folded like a barricade. For a moment I almost turned back. It wasn't like me to meddle. I'd always prided myself on being the kind of man who stayed out of the spotlight unless invited. But tonight was different. Tonight they'd written me out of my own daughter's story, and that wasn't going to sit right in my bones. Still, I knew charging out there with a speech wasn't the answer. That would make me the villain they'd whisper about. Michael ruined the reception. No, if I was going to take a stand, it had to be smart. Surgical. I was still thinking when I heard footsteps. A young staffer in a headset appeared, balancing a clipboard. She jumped a little when she saw me. "Oh, hi. Can I help you?" "Just looking for the restroom," I lied easily. She pointed back toward the main hallway, but her eyes kept darting to the screen showing the reception. "You part of the AV team?" she asked. I smiled faintly. "Not officially. But I know my way around a soundboard." That was true. Back when Sarah was in middle school choir, I'd volunteered for every concert, running lights and sound so the kids felt like stars. I could rig a mic in under a minute, balance levels on instinct. The staffer hesitated, then sighed. "Honestly, I'm glad you're here. Kyle, the groom's friend, was supposed to load the second slideshow, but he hasn't given me the files yet. We're running tight on timing and the manager's breathing down my neck." "Second slideshow?" That was new. "What's it for?" I asked. "Some kind of funny moments thing before the bouquet toss," she said. "Inside jokes for their friends. But if we don't get it in 5 minutes, we'll have to skip it." Shame to skip something planned, I said slowly. Mind if I check the system? Just to make sure it's ready when the file comes? She exhaled like I'd just offered her oxygen. Be my guest. I'll go see if Kyle's even here. The moment she disappeared, I slid into the booth seat. The control panel was familiar newer model, but the logic was the same. A quick click through the folders showed me the earlier slideshow file, the one Kyle had run during dinner. I thought about those photos, how they'd mined my old memories without even acknowledging it. Then my eyes landed on a USB slot. The velvet box in my jacket seemed to press against me. I didn't have a USB of my own, but I had my phone. And on my phone, I had a short video I'd been making for weeks, something I'd planned to give Sarah privately after the wedding. Clips of her growing up, set to Louis Armstrong's What a Wonderful World. The footage wasn't flashy, just real. Sarah covered in frosting on her first birthday, Sarah chasing a dog in the yard, Sarah at 16 waving from behind the wheel of her first car. Every moment was mine. Ours. I could almost hear my mother's voice. If the truth is good, it can stand on its own. The decision made itself. I quickly sent the video from my phone to the system via Bluetooth. It loaded smoothly into the playlist slot marked Bouquet Toss Video. The original file was still missing. Kyle hadn't delivered. I set mine to autoplay when the DJ cued it. No extra notes, no labels. Just the truth unpolished. The headset girl returned, flustered. Kyle's MIA. Probably outside smoking. I shrugged casual. Well, good news, the slot's ready. When the DJ calls for it, just hit play. She grinned in relief. Thank you. Seriously. You're a lifesaver. I stepped out before she could ask anything else. Back in the main hall, I slipped into my seat at table 27. Laura arched an eyebrow, but I only gave her a small smile. The night rolled on. The cake was cut, more photos taken. I kept my eye on the schedule. Tension sat in my chest, but it was the kind that comes with anticipation, not dread. Across the room, Ethan worked the crowd like a politician, shaking hands, leaning in for photos, his tie loosened just enough to seem relaxed. Sarah was beside him, though her smile looked thinner now. I wondered if she felt the weight of what she'd let happen, or if she'd decided, for the sake of peace, to ignore it entirely. When the DJ finally announced, "And now, a little something before the bouquet toss," the room quieted. The lights dimmed again, pulling focus to the big screen. I saw Ethan glance toward Kyle's empty chair, confusion flickering across his face. Then the video began. The first frame was Sarah at 5, standing in the driveway with chalk-stained hands, grinning so wide her cheeks nearly swallowed her eyes. A low murmur went through the crowd, a different kind of murmur than during Kyle's curated slideshow. This wasn't posed. It wasn't perfect. It was live. Clip after clip rolled. Sarah riding her bike with training wheels, shrieking in triumph. Sarah in her high school graduation gown, hugging me so tight her cap nearly fell off. Sarah making silly faces in the passenger seat of my truck during a road trip. And over it all, Armstrong's gravelly voice, warm as a summer night. I see trees of green, red roses too. I didn't look at the crowd much, but when I did, I saw more than a few guests dabbing at their eyes. Even some of Ethan's friends, the ones who'd been loudest earlier, were quiet now. On the screen, the final clip appeared. Sarah in her wedding dress from earlier that afternoon, filmed on my phone as she came out of the bridal suite, laughing at something I'd said off camera. I told her she looked like the sun coming up. The video faded to black, and for a beat the room was still. Then the applause came, not polite, but warm. Real. I sat back, letting it wash over me. Across the room, Ethan's jaw was tight, his smile stretched. Sarah's eyes were wide, fixed on me. She mouthed something I couldn't read. The bouquet toss happened, but the mood had shifted. People kept coming by table 27 to pat my shoulder, to tell me what a beautiful video that was. Laura leaned close. "That was you, wasn't it?" I didn't answer. She didn't need one. From then on, the slights kept stacking, though smaller. When the DJ called family for a group photo and Ethan's sister guided me to the edge, half out of frame. When dessert plates were cleared from every table but ours, forcing me to wave a server down. When Ethan clinked his glass for attention and announced an after-party, for the bridal party and close friends only. Each moment was a chip at the same stone, carving me down to something they thought they could manage. But what they didn't know was that each slight was also kindling. And the fire was catching. When the reception wound down, I didn't linger. I shook hands, accepted hugs, even posed for a photo or two. I hugged Sarah, holding her just a moment longer than she expected. She didn't pull away. "Beautiful day," I said softly. Her voice was low. "Dad, the video." I cut her off with a small smile. "Just a little truth. Take care of yourself." I walked out before she could answer. The cool night air outside was a relief after the heavy sweetness of the reception hall. Guests were clustered near the valet stand, laughing, smoking, calling for rides. My truck was parked at the far end of the lot, under a street lamp. I unlocked it, sat inside, and took a deep breath. Through the windshield, I could see the lit windows of the hall. Somewhere in there, my daughter was beginning her marriage. Somewhere in there, Ethan was probably wondering how his carefully choreographed evening had slipped, just a little, out of his control. I wasn't done yet. Because a stage isn't just wood and lights. A stage is any place where the truth can be heard. And I was going to find the biggest stage they'd ever given me, whether they invited me to stand on it or not. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the faint hum of my refrigerator in the next room filling the silence. The velvet box sat on my nightstand, unopened, almost accusing me. I'd planned to give it to her as a quiet, private gift, something only we shared. But the way things had gone, slipping it into her hands in a corner would have felt like an apology. And I had nothing to apologize for. By sunrise, I'd made up my mind. I wasn't going to barge into their lives screaming. I wasn't going to start fights that could be twisted into proof I was difficult. But I was going to put myself somewhere they couldn't push me into the shadows. Somewhere they had to look me in the eye. The opportunity came faster than I expected. 3 days after the wedding, an email from Sarah landed in my inbox. The subject line, "Dad ceremony video." Inside, a short message, "Thought you might like to see the footage when it's ready. We're doing a watch party this Friday at Ethan's parents' place. 6 p.m. Hope you can make it. No apologies. No mention of the seating. Just an invitation that sounded polite on the surface, but felt like a test." I replied within minutes. "Wouldn't miss it." Ethan's parents lived in one of those sprawling suburban houses where the driveway curves like a question mark and the front lawn looks professionally coned. When I arrived, cars were already lined along the street. Inside, the living room had been rearranged so every chair faced a massive flat-screen TV mounted above the fireplace. A buffet table along the wall groaned under dips and platters of finger food. I spotted Sarah across the room, radiant as ever, her hair down in loose waves. She smiled when she saw me, a real smile this time, and crossed the room to hug me. "Hey, Dad," she said softly. "Hey, sweetheart. I replied, holding her just long enough for her to feel it. Then Ethan appeared. He shook my hand, his grip firm and quick. "Glad you could make it," he said with the tone of someone marking attendance. I gave him a polite nod. "Wouldn't miss it." The guests settled in as Ethan's father dimmed the lights. "All right, everyone," he announced. "We've got the full ceremony and reception highlights ready. Big thanks to Kyle for putting it together." A cheer went up for Kyle, who sat near the front, sipping a beer like he'd just been knighted. The video began. It was slick drone shots of the church steeple, slow-motion petals falling, close-ups of smiles timed perfectly to the swelling piano music. I'll give Kyle this, he had an eye for beauty. But as the minutes ticked by, I realized something. I wasn't in it. Not completely absent, there were a few quick cuts where I appeared in the background, blurred and half-turned. But the moments that should have been mine, walking Sarah down the aisle, giving my toast, the father-daughter dance, were either trimmed to a flash or absent entirely. The father-daughter dance clip lasted 3 seconds, the camera cutting away before my face could register. It was as if the evening had been carefully edited to reduce me to a guest, not a father. Around me, people laughed at the jokes, clapped at the kisses, sighed at the romantic close-ups. But I just sat there, the hum in my ears growing louder. And then came the part I'd been waiting for. Toward the end, Kyle's montage shifted into funny moments, from the reception friends mugging for the camera, a groomsman doing the worm, kids sneaking extra cake. And there it was, the slot where my video had played that night. Except it didn't. Instead, Kyle had replaced it with a series of inside jokes: Ethan chugging champagne, Sarah mock arguing over cake flavors, a friend pretending to catch the bouquet. My video was gone. Completely erased. My chest went cold, then hot. They hadn't just tried to shove me to the back table that night, they decided to rewrite the memory entirely. When the video ended, the lights came up and everyone clapped. Ethan's dad made a joke about the honeymoon, people started moving toward the food, and Kyle stood to take a bow. I didn't move. I just watched Sarah. She wasn't laughing. Her gaze flicked to me, then away, as if she knew I'd noticed. I stood slowly, the velvet box heavy in my jacket. I crossed the room and conversations dipped as I passed. I stopped in front of the TV, cleared my throat just enough to be heard. "Before we eat," I said, "I'd like to share something. It's short." Ethan's father frowned slightly. "Michael, maybe after dinner?" "No," I said, calm but steady. "Now." There was a stillness in the room. The kind that comes when people sense something unscheduled, something real. I pulled my phone from my pocket, tapped the screen, and sent a video to the TV via the casting menu. It connected instantly, maybe because I'd used the same brand of system before, maybe because the universe had finally decided I'd earned a break. The screen lit up with the first frame. Sarah at 5 years old, chalk all over her hands, grinning like she'd invented joy. Armstrong's voice filled the room again. "I see trees of green." I didn't narrate. I didn't need to. Clip after clip rolled: the bike rides, the graduations, the road trips. And in the silence between notes, I could feel the weight of the room shift. Halfway through, I glanced at Sarah. Tears slid down her cheeks, unhidden. Ethan's jaw was locked, his hands clasped in front of him. When the final clip faded, Sarah in her wedding dress laughing off camera, I stepped forward, holding the velvet box. "This," I said, my voice low but carrying, "is my mother's locket. I've kept it for decades, and I was going to give it to Sarah on her wedding day. But the day didn't go how I thought it would. Tonight seems right." I opened the box, revealing the gold locket with its 2 photos, one of Sarah at 3, one of her from the morning of the wedding. This, I continued, is a reminder. That family isn't the table you're seated at. It's the people who make room for you no matter what. I held it out. Sarah stepped forward, took it in trembling hands and whispered, "Thank you, Dad." The room was quiet. Not tense, not awkward, just quiet. I nodded to her, then turned back toward my seat. I didn't need applause. The truth had landed where it needed to. As I sat, Laura leaned over, eyes bright. "That," she whispered, "was a stage." And for the first time since the wedding I felt taller. But I also knew something else. They wouldn't let this go. Not Ethan. Not his family. They'd try to spin it, minimize it, maybe even turn Sarah against me to regain control. Which meant I had to be ready. Because sometimes the turning point isn't the big blowout. Sometimes it's the quiet moment when everyone in the room realizes you're not going to stay in the shadows anymore and you're just getting started. I didn't have to wait long for the fallout. By Monday morning the call started. First from Laura, her voice bubbling with barely restrained glee. "Michael, I went to church yesterday and half the congregation couldn't stop talking about your video. Said it was the most heartfelt thing they'd seen in years. And the way Sarah hugged you? You should have seen Ethan's face." Then from an old neighbor who'd been at the reception. "Mike, you made us all tear up. That boy of hers better know he married into a good man's family." Even my mechanic, whose cousin had been a guest, shook my hand and said, "Heard you pulled a move at that wedding. Respect." The thing about truth is once it's out there, it grows legs. And mine was sprinting. But with the praise came the other kind of attention, the kind wrapped in fake smiles and clipped tones. On Wednesday, I got an email from Ethan's father. "Michael, while we appreciate your sentiment, we feel your unplanned presentation overshadowed certain planned moments of the evening. In the future, we ask that you coordinate with the couple before making public displays." I didn't reply. There's nothing to gain from debating with someone who thinks kindness needs scheduling. Instead, I focused on the next stage. Not revenge for revenge's sake. I'm not a man who enjoys spite for sport. But justice? That's something else entirely. Justice is setting the record straight so it can't be rewritten again. 2 weeks later, Sarah and Ethan hosted a post-wedding brunch for extended friends and family. It was held at a local country club, the kind where every chair has the club's crest embroidered into the fabric. My invitation came via group text, a sign, I suspected, that Ethan hadn't pushed for my exclusion outright, but wasn't thrilled I was coming either. When I arrived, the dining hall was already buzzing. People milled between the buffet tables, balancing mimosas and small plates of eggs Benedict. At the far end, a microphone stood near a small podium. Behind it, a projector screen displayed a looping slideshow of honeymoon photos, beaches, cocktails, matching sunglasses. I spotted Sarah speaking to one of her bridesmaids. She looked happy, but there was a faint weariness under her smile. Ethan, meanwhile, was laughing loudly with a group of his golf buddies, his arms slung around one of their shoulders like they'd just won a championship. I greeted a few relatives, accepted a cup of coffee, and found a seat near the middle. I didn't need to be in the back this time. I wasn't going to hide. Midway through the brunch, Ethan tapped the microphone for attention. "Hey everyone," he said, grinning. "We just wanted to thank you all for coming and for being part of our big day, and now, our first weeks as newlyweds. We've got a little surprise too. My buddy Kyle put together an extended cut of the wedding video with some extra honeymoon clips. So, grab your seats and enjoy." I could feel my jaw tighten. Kyle again. Another chance to edit me out of my own story. As the lights dimmed, the video began. Same drone shots, same music, same polished veneer. And once again I was almost invisible, a shadow in the periphery, a blur in the background. Even the locket moment from the watch party had been cut. They'd erased it like it never happened. That was their mistake. Because unlike last time, I'd come prepared. 2 days before, I'd reached out to an old friend from the community center, a retired videographer named Howard who owed me a favor. I gave him all the raw footage I'd collected over the years. Birthdays, graduations, Sunday picnics, Sarah's first day at work. And, of course, the full-length version of my locket presentation from the watch party recorded by Laura on her phone, crystal clear. Howard worked fast. By Saturday night, I had a professionally edited piece 10 minutes long, seamlessly blending Sarah's life story with the wedding day, ending on the locket moment. No narration. No bitterness. Just the truth, shining so bright it couldn't be mistaken for anything else. And I had it on a small flash drive in my jacket pocket. So when Kyle's extended cut ended and polite applause rolled through the room, I stood. "If I could have just a few minutes," I said, projecting my voice without touching the mic. Ethan's smile faltered. "Michael, maybe we should." I ignored him and addressed the room. "I know we've all seen the wedding from a certain angle. But I'd like to share a view you might not have seen. One that's a little less polished but a lot more honest." I walked to the podium, pulled the flash drive from my pocket, and plugged it into the projector's laptop before anyone could stop me. Howard's video began instantly. Gasps rippled through the room at the opening shot. Sarah at age 2, perched on my shoulders, giggling as I pretended to stumble through the yard. The footage rolled forward through the years. Halloween costumes, softball games, her prom night. Guests who'd only known her as an adult leaned in, smiling at the glimpses of her younger self. Then came the wedding day, not the curated, carefully timed shots, but the real moments. Me helping her adjust her veil when no one was looking. Laura catching us mid-laugh over some old inside joke. The father-daughter dance in full, uncut, with our quiet exchange under the music. And finally the locket. Howard had zoomed in just enough to catch the emotion on our faces, my steady voice, her trembling hands, the tears in her eyes. The moment played without interruption, ending on her whisper, "Thank you, Dad." The screen faded to black. The silence that followed was deep, the kind that demands you sit with it. Then came the applause, louder this time, unprompted, and carrying the weight of something understood. I turned to Sarah. She was already standing, tears on her cheeks, the locket visible around her neck. She crossed the space between us and hugged me in front of everyone. "I should have made more room for you that day," she whispered. I pulled back enough to meet her eyes. "All that matters is you know I was always there. And I always will be." Ethan didn't approach. His expression was carefully blank, but his fingers drummed against his thigh. His parents clapped politely, but their smiles were thin. I didn't care. Because in that moment the balance shifted. The story could no longer be rewritten without my part in it. The truth had been shown, publicly and without malice, and everyone in that room had seen it for themselves. After brunch, people came up to shake my hand, to share their own memories of Sarah, to tell me how moved they'd been. Even some of Ethan's friends, the loud ones, nodded in respect as they passed. Laura found me before I left. "You didn't just make a stage today, Michael," she said, her voice warm. "You took the whole room." Driving home, I felt something I hadn't in weeks: peace. Not the kind that comes from avoiding conflict, but the kind that comes from facing it head-on and walking away with your head high. That night, I put the velvet box back in my dresser. The locket was where it belonged now, and the story was finally told the way it was meant to be. Sometimes revenge isn't about tearing someone down. Sometimes it's about building something so solid and honest that no one can knock it over. And sometimes, the sweetest revenge is simply standing where they told you not to and making the whole world see why you belong there. Looking back now, I realize it was never just about a seat at the table. It was about what that seat represented: belonging, respect, and a place in my own daughter's life. Ethan and his family thought they could push me to the edges, crop me out of the frame, and rewrite the memory as if I'd been nothing more than a polite guest. But the truth has a way of finding light. And when it does, it can't be hidden again. I didn't raise Sarah to be afraid of standing her ground. And that night at the brunch, when she wore my mother's locket in front of everyone, I knew she'd really seen me for the father I'd always been. Sometimes justice isn't loud or vengeful. Sometimes it's quiet, steady, and undeniable. It's in the moments when you step onto the stage they tried to keep from you, and you let the truth speak for itself. Because in the end, it's not about winning or losing. It's about making sure your place in the story is carved in so deeply, no one can erase it. Please subscribe to this channel.